Hello, welcome to this AOPS tutorial. So basically this is going to be a full tutorial series for using the patching system that comes with Game Launcher Creator V3 Indie and Developer Edition. Now I'm going to split this into separate parts because in the past we've usually done like one long video tutorial, and in doing that the tutorial can end up being like 50 minutes long, maybe an hour, and and people have to scrub through and maybe go back to certain parts. So I figured with Game Launcher Creator V3 and this brand new AOPS tutorial, I'm going to do it in segments. So I'm going to create a playlist here on YouTube, and you'll be able to follow that series too. So you can just literally skip to, once you've watched all of them together, if you need to go back to a certain part, you can just literally skip to literally that video. Or that part in the playlist, and I think that's for the best. Now AOPS, let me just give you a quick overview of how AOPS works if you're not familiar. AOPS is very, very simple at the core. Basically all you do is you scan over your game files and AOPS creates a patch list file, and this patch list file stores information about every single game file for your game. Such as the game executable, the exe, the DLL files, the image files, basically every single file that's in your game folder that the user needs to play the game. And once it's created the patch list file, it's then literally just a case of uploading that patch list file and then uploading the game files, and then configuring the launcher and the patch system just to tell it where certain things are, and the amount of things that you need to tell or instruct the patcher to use is not a lot by all means. It's literally about 3 or 4 different URLs that you need to put in, because the system is dynamic, and it's dynamic for a reason. It's so that you can change stuff willy-nilly at any point in the future, because I'm a firm believer that people should not be limited with the developments, and that's the beauty of Game Launcher Creator V3, is that you can edit your launchers at any time, you can edit configuration files at any time, and update these files as well. And that's the reason why all these files are stored online. One is to make them accessible for the patcher no matter where the user is, and 2, you can update stuff in real time as well. But yeah, I mean, on the surface AOPS might seem complicated, but honestly it really isn't. It's just understanding the fundamentals of how AOPS works, and once you get the gist of that, you'll be flying after that. Now one thing I can't stress enough is you should read the documentation. The documentation is there for a reason. I've taken the time out to write that documentation. I've done lots of tutorials like how to build a new patch with GLC V3, and it's all written. These kind of tutorials, they take a good hour or 2 hours to write up. So before you go to the Discord server and oh, how does this work or how does that work, and go to the documentation system first and follow that through. But obviously you've got this video tutorial series here to follow as well. But yeah, like I said, on the surface it might seem complicated, but at the core it really isn't. It really isn't, and hopefully we can ascertain that throughout this tutorial series here for AOPS. I'm going to try and explain it in the most simple and best terms I can, in layman terms, and just let's see how we get on. But like I said, the Discord support is there if you need it. The documentation system is there if you need it, and we have email support as well. We do have a support team that are ready for helping out wherever you may need help. But again, AOPS is dead easy, and I know I keep saying it, but I'm going to show it in this tutorial series. So in order to follow this tutorial for AOPS, you obviously will need the Indie or the Developer Edition of Game Launcher Creator V3. So when you're ready, launch up Game Launcher Creator V3 and let's get started on building a patch system with Game Launcher Creator. Alright, so in this first part, this is going to be more of a formal introduction than what the previous video was. So yeah, alright, so you've got your game compiled. What you need to do is, if you've not got your game compiled, compile your game now, whether you're using Unity, Unreal Editor, Game Maker, Construct, ClickTeam Fusion, whatever it is that you're using to develop your game. build out your files now, your final files, because that's what you're going to need to build this patch. All right, so into GLC here. Now, there's a couple of prerequisites that you're going to need for this, for the patching as well. Is the first thing you're going to need is an FTP software like FileZilla. FileZilla is free, costs absolutely nothing. You can download it, just Google it. Just Google FileZilla and download the free version. This will enable you to connect to FTP to your server. So obviously the second thing that you're going to need is some kind of server. So if it's going to be web hosting, a patch server, a VPS or a dedicated server, anything that you've got, somewhere to host your files online, because the game files obviously need to be online in order for the patch system to download them to the user's computer. And AWS buckets are supported, S3 buckets are supported. You're just going to make sure that they're set to public. Now, I could be here all day talking about servers and the server setups, but the basic principles are, wherever you upload your files to, it needs to be a web server, and the public, it needs to have public permissions in order to download the files. If you're using a Windows server, so IIS, then what you need to do is ensure that you create a wildcard MIME type, so that people who visit your server can download files of any file type. That usually just involves putting an asterisk in, but you can Google that. You can just Google, wildcard file type for Windows IIS. But yeah, server wise, you can even use standard web hosting. If you've got some standard web hosting, you can use that. But again, where we have to draw the line with support is if it's not one of our servers, we can't provide you with support for that server. So if something is not working correctly, we can try and guide you, because sometimes it could be a HT access issue, file permission issue and whatnot. We can guide you on that, that's fine, but ultimately they're not our servers. So if you're not comfortable with using standard web hosting or your own server or whatever it is, then we provide patch servers for you, and we can give you full support for them as well. And the packages start off really cheap. We have a basic, a light, a standard and an ultra patch server. And they're available monthly or yearly. So yeah, I'll drop the link down below and in this video, so you can go to the website and check out the patch servers that we have. It's easy to use, it's all automated. You can just select the patch server that you want, fill out the details, sign up, and your server's instantly ready as soon as the process is complete. So you're going to need some kind of web hosting or some kind of server to host your files on. It's got to be a web server, remember that. And the file permissions need to be public, so that the patcher can access and download those files. And that's pretty much it, really. So yeah, there's no real other prerequisites that you're going to require apart from that. So let's crack on then, and let's see what we can do with our launcher. So obviously I don't have a launcher pre-built, so I'm just going to put in test AOPS launcher for the Windows title. And I'm going to go with the Desolate Lands template. I feel it's probably going to be best for this. So you just imagine that this is your launcher that you're building. So I'm going to skip over the design stuff. And in this tutorial series, I'm just going to cover the basic implementation of a patch system. And then what I'll do is, once we've completed the tutorial series, at the end I'll put in the developer edition special tutorial where you can embed or integrate the actual patching system into your actual launcher design. Right, so this is going to be our launcher. We've got our update button down here. So sometimes what you need to do is, with the patch system, if it's a new patch system that you're developing, you need to kind of work backwards. So you need to put in hypothetical URLs and stuff, and then upload the files. But we'll cover that in the tutorial, don't worry about that. So the first thing that we need to do is, down here, this is on my desktop, I've got a folder called new patch test. So once I've compiled my game files, I'm going to put them into a folder called files in. Now if you look at this folder, it's not an actual game, I'm just using this for the tutorial. It's actually Macromedia Fireworks. I've just copied all the files over, but I'm going to pretend that these are the game files, because it doesn't really matter. for the sake of this tutorial. So you can see there I've got the executable file, all the DLL files and all the files that are needed for the game to run, and all the folders as well, and all the subfolders and files, they're all in there as well. So this totals at around 137 meg. So yeah, so what you need to do is compile your game files and then create a folder on your desktop, maybe call it your patch, and then have a folder inside there called files in, and this is your game, all the game files. Right, okay, so what we need, the first thing that we need to do is we need to create a local version text file. So I just go to new text document and type in version, and we're going to call this version 1.0. So this needs to stay, this needs to actually be in the game folder, or, well, ideally your launcher needs to be in here as well. So once you've finished designing your launcher and you build it out, I'm going to assume that you're going to have the launcher in the same directory as your game, because that's where it's going to launch the game from. So once you've built your game launcher, just copy them files into here as well, and then you can copy, and then you can include the launcher into the patch as well. So if you ever update your launcher, it'll update on here as well. Right, so we've got our local version text file, because the first thing we need to configure is the versioning. So we go up to updates and we select versioning. So it's going to ask where the local version is. So we're going to say it's in a file and it's in version text. So when the launcher runs, it will check the number inside the local text file, which is 1.0 at the moment. And then we need to specify where our remote version file is going to be. So for this tutorial, I'm going to use a temporary patch server that I've set up, which is one of our servers. It's dannytest.byteboxserver.com. So let's see if I can just get that up in a window. So this is generally what you see when you have a patch server from us. As you can see, the general public doesn't need to see anything that's on your patch server, and it's quite secure. People can't directory browse and look through your game files. So this is generally just the only thing that you see, really. So we need to specify where the remote version file is going to be. So in our tutorial, it's going to be dannytest.byteboxserver.com/version.txt. So then what I need to do is create that on the server. So create a new file, version.txt. Then what I can do is I can view and edit that file. And I can just type in 1.0, re-upload that back to the server. Now, if you notice the URL that we're using here for our versioning, if you copy that, go to your web browser and then just paste it in, it should bring up the version text file. It should bring up the information here. Now if it doesn't, then that's where you've got a bit of a problem that you need to look into. There's something misconfigured with your web server. It's either that, or you've created a typo in here, so it's not the correct address. But yeah, you can simply just test that as you go along. So we can see there that it is online, it's accessible, we can read it. That's perfect. Now you'll notice that I've done 1.0 for the remote text file here, and I've also done 1.0 for the initial game install. So what I'm going to do is, in fact, what you need to do is set this to a lower number. So we can set this to say 0.1. That's going to be the initial install. So I set it to 0.1. So what's going to happen is it's going to trigger. So we go back to our versioning settings and we can actually say check at start. So basically when the user runs the launcher, it's going to do the version check straight away before the launcher even appears. So your launcher is going to connect to, it's going to load up the local information, then it's going to connect to the remote version file, and it's going to compare the two numbers and see if there's a version available, an update available. And if there is, this is what this event's for here, update available. So then all you need to do is click on the plus action, and you need to select patch system. Now for the sake of this tutorial, we don't need any patch parameters, not right now anyway. So we can just select patch system and close that. And I think it's also wise for us to maybe close the launcher as well, because we're going to include our launcher files inside the scan. If you're going to include the launcher files inside the scan, then you need to exit the launcher as a secondary action. So it'll launch the patch system and then exit the launcher. By exiting the launcher, that means that if there is any launcher updates in with your scan, it can download and apply those updates. It won't be able to do that if the launcher is still running in the background, because it won't be able to overwrite the files. So again, for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to remove that because I don't feel like I need to use it for now, but we will cover that later. So that is pretty much set. That's how easy that is. So we've set up the local version number, which is a version text file here. We've set up the remote version, so we're saying this is the URL that you need to check for the latest version number, and then we're just telling it what to do when there is an update available. You don't have to launch the patch system. You can go to a certain URL. You can minimize the launcher. You can do multiple actions. With Indian Developer Edition, you can do multiple actions. So maybe you want to launch the patch system and minimize the launcher. There's all sorts of things you can do. You can basically do whatever you want to do. But yeah, so there's many different options available there for you to use. And that is pretty much it for setting up the versioning. So we have our server here. So we can see we've got our version text file online now, and we've also checked that the version text file is readable and accessible, and we also have our local version number specified in a local version text file. Alright, in this part of the AOPS tutorial video, we're going to look at how we can set up the basics of the configuration that we're going to need for our patching system, and we'll take a look at the files as well. But I think we should probably leave the files actually until the next video, just to keep everything as split up as possible. But what we need to do is, when we've got our launcher open like this, we go up to Updates and Patch Builder. And when you click on this, it's going to open up a new application, which is the AOPS Patch Builder application, which is completely separate from Game Launcher Creator V3 application itself. The reason for this is because you can now manage multiple projects and different versions of your software straight from here. So what we need to do is, if this is your first patch build for your launcher, then what you need to do is you simply go up here, click on File and select New Project. Now I'm going to call this Test AOPS Patcher, and our starting version number is going to be 0.1.0, just like what we have in our version text file, which is 0.1 or 0.1.0. So we can click on Create, and it creates us this version inside here. Now, as you can see, it's completely blank. There's nothing in here, which is perfectly normal, because it's a blank patch at the minute. So I'm not going to do the files in this video, but what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the settings. So the first thing you need to do is go up to Settings and click on Main Settings. So here in this dialog, it's going to ask us for all the settings for our patching. Now some of these files won't exist yet, but we create them anyway. We write down what they are going to be called in here, and then we'll create them later on. So we've already got our project name up here. We don't need that in twice. Custom extension. So basically the reason why we use a custom extension for the patching system is because two reasons. The first one is a lot of servers, web servers, don't like the users downloading particular files, especially executable files and stuff like that. And just sometimes it doesn't have the MIME capability to serve a particular file. Especially if that MIME type isn't registered with the server to be served. So we use a custom extension, and you can use anything in here. We recommend that you don't leave it blank. We do recommend that you use your own extension. And this can be anything. You could call it AOPS, you could call it GLC, you can call it MyFile, whatever you want you can call it. Just give it something. And what this does is, when it renames the files before you upload them, it's going to append this extension to the end. And this way your server really then should serve all the files, so there's not going to be any complications. So for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to use the custom extension AOPS. Now the next one is the cache buster type. Now you must make sure that you fill this out. It comes blank by default, and it will revert to default if you don't fill it out, but it's very wise that you do. And you can't just write in default, you've got to use capitalized, so it's got to be default like that. So what is the cache buster type? The cache buster type basically tells the server, do we want a cached version or do we want the most fresh version that you can possibly serve to us? Now, depending on your server setup and how you like things running, the options there, you can use cache busting or no cache busting. So if you have, we don't usually recommend that you use any server-side caching. And the reason for that is because if you forget to flush that cache or refresh the cache, your potential users could still be downloading old files even when there's a new update out. So we always recommend really to use none. But if you're comfortable with your own server-side caching and you're confident that you're going to clear the cache every time you release a new update, then you can just stick to default, that's fine. But for the sake of this tutorial, again, I'm going to stick to none. Now the online patch directory. So basically we're going to create a folder on our test server, which we've got, dannytest.byteboxserver.com, and we're going to create a folder where we're going to store all our patch files in. So in this instance, let's just create it first of all in FileZilla. So this is dannytest.byteboxserver.com. I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to call it game files. So once we've scanned over our files and renamed them, we're going to upload our game files to this folder. So what I type now in the settings is the server, the domain name, which is dannytest.byteboxserver.com /game files /. Always try and end with a preceding trail if you can. So it knows now where the game files are going to be stored. And now the online patch list. So we haven't generated the patch list yet, but it doesn't matter. We can still stipulate in here where we're going to put it. So our patch list is going to go in the root directory here when we upload it. So we can, I know it's hypothetical right now, but it doesn't matter. We know what it's going to be, so we can type it in. So again, it's dannytest.byteboxserver.com patch list. We know that that's where we are going to upload our patch list file to when we're done. And then the patch salt URL. So let's cover what the patch salt is. So basically the salt should ideally be between 16 and 32 characters long, and the salt is basically your own unique little set of characters, random characters, or a password or anything like that, that just makes your patch file unique and your patch files unique. And you know, people often query, you know, what's the purpose of the salt, and the reason for the secret salt is that so nobody can hack your patch system, basically. So, and you can enter anything in here, and again, it does need to be ideally between 16 and 32 characters long. Now, you don't type the actual salt into here. What you do, go to your server, create a new file, and we're going to call it salt. I'm not going to put an extension on it, just going to call it salt, and then I'm going to edit that, and then I'm going to type in some random characters as our little secret salt. So I'm going to call it dannytest 2k23 bytebox. I'm going to save that, so you go file and save, and then it's noticed that I've edited the file, so it's going to ask us, do we want to upload it back? I'm going to select yes. So now inside there we can test that, because we can, so the name of the file is salt, so we can literally go to dannytest.byteboxserver.com salt, and there you go. You should be able to see it and again read it inside your web browser. This is how you know that it's valid and it's working. So once you know that it's valid and it's working, you simply copy this URL and paste it into here, and that's pretty much the basic setup. So our software, our patching system now knows the name of our project, what custom extension to use, the cache buster type, where the directory is online where our game files are going to be stored, where it can locate the patch list file, and where it can locate the salt file that contains the password inside. Simply click on save, and that's the main settings done. Now there are additional settings here. So for example, you have splash settings. I'm not going to cover that in this tutorial. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, plus there's documentation available for this on the ByteBox Media support website. But yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory, a lot of it. You can create your own splash screen, so you've got to enable it here, set the height and the width, and then the URL to the image on the server for the splash, and then a timer, how long you want the splash to show for. The patch design is basically you can just specify a URL in here to an image online, which will be the background for the patching system. And then the update settings. So remember when we did the versioning settings inside GLC here? So we've got versioning. So we have a local version text file here, which specifies which version the user has installed, and then the remote version telling the user which version is available. GLC doesn't actually update the text file when it's finished patching. You've got to do that from the patcher. So you basically enable this here by selecting this toggle here to on, and then you select how you want to update. So obviously we want to update local file, and then we go down to the local file name, and we just simply type in version.txt. And what this means is once the update has been downloaded and applied, it will then know which file to open to update the version number. So say the user's on 0.1, they do the update and they download all the files. The patcher will then update this to whatever the latest version is that they've just downloaded. And the reason why you do that is so that when they run the launcher again, this version number will have been updated and it will correspond with what's on the server. So the launcher knows, well, the user doesn't need to update the game anymore, because it's the same as what's on the server. So yeah, I mean, they're pretty much that's pretty much all you need to know with regards to the patch configuration settings. We have post and prerequisites here. These are reserved for the developer edition. And again, I'm not going to cover them in this video particularly. I'm probably going to cover them in a separate video. But pre and post requisites allow you to run a series of commands before or after the patching system. So for example, prerequisites are really good for game developers, because say for example your game might need the Microsoft Visual C++ runtime. Now you can use the prerequisites to check if the user has that particular version of the runtime installed, and if they haven't, you can install it for them. It's very handy. And the post requisites you can use, again, there's a multitude of different scenarios that you can use for post requisites. That's maybe once the patching is finished, you want to check a certain file exists, or you know, numerous other things. But yeah, again, they're for a different video indeed. But you can always go over to the ByteBox Media support site, the documentation website, and read about it all on there. You can also go to help and help here, and that will take you straight to the documentation site. But they are the main settings really for AOPS. So again, just to conclude on that, you can see that we've set up the salt file now. We've set up the game files directory where we're going to upload our game files to, and we've just basically told the patcher this is where the game files are. So you know, a full link to the online directory, and where the patch list will be and where the salt will be. We can't upload the patch list yet because we've not done that. We'll probably do that in the next video. And also one more other thing, if you do have a server from us, if you go to game files, you'll notice that you'll get a 403 error, and that is perfectly normal. The reason why we do that is for security, so we stop people from being able to browse your files. You know, so, and again, it's just protection for your game, and protection for your server as well. So but yeah, that's pretty much how we cover the settings for AOPS. Let's concentrate now on adding our first batch of game files. So this is relatively simple to do. First of all, do you remember earlier on in the previous video we specified where our salt file was. Well, we're going to need that salt. If you remember, I used DannyTest 2K23 ByteBox. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that, because what you need to do before you do anything else inside the patch builder, you need to go to edit and edit patch salt, and then you need to type in that patch salt in there. Now, as you can see, it's telling me it should be less than 16 characters long. So I got it wrong in the previous video. I thought we had a limit of 32, but we don't. We have 16. So I can literally delete ByteBox off there and leave it as DannyTest 2K23. And then I can just click on update. Now, because of this error, I need to go back and just modify the file on the server. I'm just going to get rid of ByteBox because it needs to be the same. So it's now DannyTest 2K23. Upload that back to the server. And then, yeah, so it's the same now inside here. And the reason why we do that is it's just a cross-reference. It's just to make sure that you are compiling the correct, with the correct patch salt. That's all it is. So we have our first version 0.1.0. Let's go to scan and scan directory. So then what it's going to do is going to pop up with this folder. So I'm going to go to the folder that I created on my desktop, which is new patch test. So new patch test, and then files in. Do you remember? We go to new patch test and files in. These are our game files here. So we just click on files in, click OK, and it's going to ask us, it's going to say, please note these are very intensive scans. The app may look like it's crashed, but it really hasn't. Do not click anywhere or use any other application until scan is complete. Do you wish to perform a scan now? So basically what this is saying is that the AOPS patch builder, when it scans through your files, it does it at a very fast rate. I mean, the numbers are phenomenal. You're probably looking at around, I don't know, maybe up to 1,000 files a second. So the best thing to do is when you come to this part of the patch building process and you want to scan over your game files, just click on yes and then leave it alone. Don't click anywhere, don't use any other application, because it could potentially crash the software. It doesn't take long at all to do the scan. You'll see how quick it does it in this video actually. And how many files do we have in here altogether? So we have just shy of 1,000 files. Watch how fast it scans through all them files. And there you go, it's done. I think that was less than a second. So it's literally scanned up just under 1,000 files in less than a second, and it's got all the file structure there. It's got all the files that exist in here, which are our potential game files. It's got all the subfolders and all the files underneath the subfolders as well. So what occurs here now is you've got this patch list and you're in full control of this patch list. So, for example, you can see all the information on each file. So you can see that the time it was created or modified or last modified, including the hours. That's the date and the timestamp. You can also see how big it is at the byte level. So for example, this HTML file here is 560 bytes, whereas this JSF file here is 33,000 bytes. And then we have some additional switches, which I'll cover in a second, and then the final checksum. This checksum includes not only the date modification, timestamp and the file size, but also our secret salts, which we entered earlier as well. And that's what makes this checksum unique to our game files. So you can navigate through this list, and basically you can, if you right click on any file, you can choose different things. Like for example, you can choose to compress certain files, you can choose to ignore certain files, and you can choose to force overwrite particular files. So let's just cover these one by one real quick for you. So for example, let's take a look at this arrow JSF file. If you right click on that and select compression, we can select number 9, which is the highest compression. So basically what will happen is when we come to build this patch, it will compress this file at the highest level, which is 9. And you can choose any level. Now you don't have to do it one by one. You can hold down, you can select a file, hold down shift on the keyboard and select more files if you need to, or you can hold down control on the keyboard and select individual files like this, and then you can simply right click and choose to batch compress ignore or force overwrite. So what is ignore and force overwrite? Well, ignore means it's going to include the file in the scan for the update, but it's not going to actually download it. It's not going to do nothing. It's not going to check anything. And there's a couple of reasons or a couple of scenarios that this is plausible to use. For example, if you do decide to include your launcher files inside your patch scans, then there's a set of files that you need to ignore. And the reason why you need to ignore those files is because they're actually in use by the launcher and the patch system itself. So you're not going to be able to download or patch or overwrite those files because it's being used by the patching process itself. Those files are documented on the documentation system, in case you're wondering what I'm referring to. So if you're not including your launcher files in your game scan, don't worry about what I've just said. But if you are including your launcher files inside your patch scans, just head over to the documentation and just type in the search excluded files, and you'll see what I mean. And then force overwrite. So there is a reason why you might want to particularly force overwrite a particular file. For example, there might be a file that the user the game modifies, and you need, it might have the same modification timestamp, the same date timestamp. It might be the same file size. So in that instance, the game, the patcher will probably look at it and go, well, there's no difference here. So it doesn't need patching, but maybe there is some data inside there which is different, because it doesn't read the data, it reads the timestamp and the file size alongside the secret salt to generate a checksum. So there are some instances where you want to force overwrite particular files, and what this means is no matter whether the checksum's different or not, the patcher will download and overwrite that file regardless, no matter what. So many people won't need to use this at all, but it is there available just in case you do need to use it. So that's pretty much that covered. And as you can see, we have 983 files, and we have an index of 982, and that's because we start at index 0. So in essence, there are 983 files there which have been scanned in. So what do we do now then? Once you've gone through all this and configured everything the way you want it to work, we can literally go to build and then patch files. When you click on this, it's going to bring up a new dialog, and it's going to ask again for the patch salt, so we can enter the patch salt URL online where our salt's contained, and then we already know that we're scanning game files in because we've already scanned it here, so it's going to ask where the output directory is. Now I've created a blank folder called files out here, so I can literally copy this address here and pop it in here, and I'm going to put the preceding trail as well. The patch list file, this is already automatically populated, so you don't need to do anything with that. And then custom extension, it's already got it from our settings earlier when we specified. Now you have a couple of additional options here. You have ignore compression flags and close dialog when compilation complete. So ignore compression flags, maybe you have, say, loads of different individual files that you've applied compression to, but you've seen there's a bit of a problem going on, or you just want to build a patch with no compression, but you don't want to go through all the files again and choose 0 for files that have that have compression. So you can just choose to ignore compression flags if that is the case. So that's pretty much it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to click build patch. It's going to go through each one of these files inside the files in. It's going to copy them over and rename them into files out. So I'm going to click build patch now, and you'll see this in action. And again, doesn't take long at all. Obviously it's not as quick as the files in, because on the files in it was just getting the information from the files. When you're building the files out, it's actually copying the whole contents of the file, so it's copying the 138 meg at the same time. And now when we go to our files out folder, you can see that we have our files are ready for upload, and they've all got the custom extension appended to the end. So that's not going to cause us, or it shouldn't cause us, any problems when it comes to the patch of downloading the files from the server. So what do we do now then? Okay, so let's go to our server, go into game files, and let's see all these files. We're going to, on the files out, we're going to select all of them. Now before you do that, a little tidbit here for you. If you're using FileZilla, if you're using some other FTP application, I don't really know where this setting's going to be, but you should be able to find it quite easy. But in FileZilla, what you need to do is you need to click on transfer, and go to transfer type, and make sure you have binary selected. And the reason for that is because if you upload in ASCII or auto, it's going to change the encoding method. Sorry, not method, just the encoding of the files that you upload, and that's going to cause a whole host of problems. So you want to make sure that you're uploading files in binary mode, and this means it basically uploads the file as a complete mirror image to how the file is stored on your computer. So just make sure that binary is selected before you upload any files to your server. And then once you've done that, we just simply grab these and we're going to drag and upload them to the game files folder like we specified earlier on in our settings. So a quick recap while that's just doing that. We don't need to build patch now, we've already built that patch out. In fact, what we can do while they're uploading is we can do the finishing touches. There's not much left to do now because we're uploading the game files. We basically just need to build out the patch configuration file. So we can export configuration. Now, I've got a folder called info here, and this is where I'm going to export the patch configuration. There we go, just type in patch config, we save that. You can see there that it's exported that out. And then what we can do is we can export our patch list as well for version 0.1.0. Export the patch list, same procedure, except we're going to call it patch list. Save that, and there you go. So we now have our patch configuration and our patch list ready to rock and roll. Let's just check the upload status of them files. We're nearly there. I think that's pretty much it. There's not really much more else to cover on that. You see, it's not as tricky as you'd imagine it would be. It's relatively easy to use. So they're the steps that you need to follow. Now I'll just go over this quickly because when you want to come to build your next patch, it's even quicker because you've already got all your configuration and that done. So when you want to build your next patch, you simply just click on add new version and you type in the new version number. So for instance, this will be 0.2.0, and then you just repeat the same again. You just go to scan the files for 0.2, and then once you've scanned your files and they appear in here, just go through the files, do whatever you need to do, and then just click on build patch files and build patch list. You don't need to build your configuration file out again unless you've changed something in the settings. So that's pretty much it. So you do create a new version. This is for future versions. Create a new version, scan the files, build the patch files out and upload them, and then build out the patch list as well. I'm just going to go back to 0.10 there. This should be nearing completion. So you can see it's uploaded these files to the dannytest.byteboxserver.com server. And we've already built out our configuration file and our patch list. And again, you don't need to build your configuration file out unless you change something inside here. What's this saying? Yeah, go. Yeah, you don't need, obviously the first time you build your first patch, you need to build the configuration out. The configuration is used by the patching system, so you'll need to put that inside your data folder or upload it. If you're using the developer edition, you can upload the configuration file to your server. So that means that you can change any of your patch configuration at any time and just upload it to your server, and every time a user runs the patch system, it'll get the fresh settings every time, which is a pretty cool feature. But for Indy, you can't do that because you can't use command lines. Right, so that's done. We don't need to do anything else with the AOPS patch builder anymore. So we've got our files now on the server, and again, you'll notice for the protection of your files, if we try and go to the game files directory through the web browser, it won't let us. It's like, nope, you don't have the rights to look through these game files. But don't worry, because the patching system will be able to access the patch files. Now, just before we finish, do you remember the patch list and patch configuration that we built out here? Do you remember the patch list? Do you remember where we specified the patch list to go? Just reopen up the patch builder. Because remember we did the hypotheticals earlier on in the configuration. Well, we've already generated them files now, so we can upload them to where they need to be. So I'm going to open up our project again inside the patch builder, and I'm just going to go to settings and just remember, look, so we just said we'd put it in the root folder, patch list. So I'll go to the root folder here, upload the patch list, and there's our patch list on our server. We've already got our salts and we've already got our game files. They're the three most important things now after the first build. So we've got our game files folder here with all our games in, ready to go. We've got our patch list uploaded here, which is ready to go, and our patch salt uploaded here, so that's ready to go as well. And that's pretty much it. So what's going to happen now, up to now, is if you try and run the patching system, it should work. There's no reason why it shouldn't work. Alright, so we've gone through pretty much the basic setup of a patching system with GLC v3, and that'll work for indie and developer editions. So the final thing to do is build our launcher. So once you're happy with that, you can just go to File, Build Launcher, and when the build dialog comes up, you've got to remember to include patching. So you've got to toggle this to on, because it'll include the patching system then as well. And once you've done that and you've configured your executable file name and any other settings that you need to do, just click on build, and the game launcher creator will build out our launcher. Doesn't take too long at all, a few seconds. There we go. So if we click on view launcher files, we can see we have our launcher here, all our launcher files. So we can just simply select them, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to our game install folder that I've created in this new patch test, which is completely blank, and I'm just going to paste those launcher files over. I used Control V then, in case you didn't know. You can just right click and select paste once you've copied them from here. Now, a couple of things before we do our first launcher test, and the first thing is, let me just minimize v3. Do you remember before we built out the patch configuration file? Well, the first thing you need to do is just rename that, because we're going to use it locally, so we need to rename it to patch.config. And we copy that, paste it into your data folder with your launcher, because this is where it's going to look, the patching system is going to look for our patch configuration file, which contains all our patch settings inside. And there, that's pretty much it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run the launcher. Now, if you remember, on the versioning settings, I set it up so that it checks at the start of the launcher. So it'll check the version text file, which, by the way, doesn't exist right now. We need to create that. And then it'll check the remote version file. And then when an update is available, it'll call the patching system. Now, if you remember rightly, the patch that we've just built is 0.1.0. So on our first build, ideally, we create the version text file, and then we need to just set it to 0. Because this will mean that it triggers the patcher to download the game on the first run. So when I run this now, it's going to pop up, and there we go, patching system pops up, and it immediately starts downloading the game files to this directory that we're in, not that one, game install. You can see the files being downloaded here, look. So they're being downloaded from the server and installed onto the computer. And what it'll do is it's checking the integrity of every single file. So what it'll do, what the AOPS 2 system does, is it downloads all the files and patches them, and then before it closes, it'll recheck all the files just to make sure that the integrities are intact. And if they're not, then it knows that there's a problem and the file will start looping. It'll probably throw an error as well. So if when you do this first initial test here like this, if it throws an error up, it means that you've done something wrong. It means that you've either put in a typo somewhere or there's something wrong with your web server. And again, we can only give you support for our web servers because they are our servers, so we know how they're set up and we can get into the actual server, you know, to fix any problems if there are any. But our servers are set up as standard to automatically support AOPS anyway, so you'll never get any problems with our servers. But if you do get an error on this first check, like this first test that we're doing like now, then there's something wrong somewhere. You need to go through your settings again and just make sure, you know, that all the URLs that you've put in exist, the salt file exists, the password in the salt file is the same as the salt that you're using for the builds, you know what I mean? But we do have extensive documentation over on the ByteBox Media support website regarding this as well. So just make sure you go through the debug logging guide and just double check everything. But as you can see, I mean, I've not done anything different here in between these videos. We've just gone from setting up our patch system, basic patch system, and you can see that it's working just fine and it's downloading all the files as it should be doing. There is just shy of 1,000 files to download. And this won't take long now. It'll probably get to about 50%, then it'll do the integrity checks on the files that it's just downloaded, and you'll see that in a second. And there we go, so it's finished downloading all the files now, and now it's just scanning through all the files that it's downloaded just to triple check that everything's okay. And voila, when it's finished, and that means that we now have our game installed and the version has been updated to the same version number that's on the server. So what this means now is that when we run our launcher again, it'll check at the beginning and it'll know that version 1 is installed on the computer and version 1's available on the server, so there's no need to update, so it won't run the patching system again. So that's basically how you set up the basic patch system inside GLC v3. Dead easy, and you can see that there's no errors that's popped up and there's no issues at all. So, you know, again, if you do run into some issues or something's not working, follow these videos again and just triple check all the URLs that you've put in, you know, triple check. Also triple check that your version text file exists here locally if you're using version text file. There are other options that you can use. So for example, you can use the registry or an ini file for your local version checking. If you have an initial installer that your user downloads, then you could write out the first version to the registry. So you can use the registry or an ini file or just a text file. Just triple check that all your URLs are correct, especially for remote version. And one of the best ways to check is to actually copy the URL and paste it into your web browser, and it should show the information there. If it doesn't, if it comes up with a 404 error or a 403 error or something like that, then something's not right with your web server, or you've typed in, you know, this is incorrect, the URL that you've specified here is incorrect. So you need to rectify that and figure it out why it's incorrect and where it's incorrect. And again, we can try and help you in the Discord, but you know, ultimately, unless it's one of our servers, there's not too much support that we can give you in that front, because it's not our service, it's not our product. So our hands ultimately become tied, and this is why we have our own set of patch servers for users of GLC, which we have hundreds of users using our patch servers daily. You know, our patch servers are super fast and they're highly efficient. They're running on a 10 gig backbone, and so no matter where you are in the world, you're going to get consistent download speeds for your users, and everything's handled for you. And you know, so I know I keep stressing that, but it is very important that I do stress that. But again, you know, just double check everything. Double check your URLs here, and then, you know, if you need to, go back to the patch builder, load the patch builder up and open your project up, and check all the URLs in the main settings that you've got in there as well, and just check that, you know, copy all them down. You know, so for example, if you open up your project and go to main settings, you know, that this here, just double check all these, triple check them, make sure that they're correct and there's no typos. Because honestly, I can't stress to you, especially in the early days of Game Launcher Creator, the amount of users that we spent so many hours on trying to help, you know, and in the end they made a typo, literally. You know, they might have missed an E off there or something like that, you know. So just triple check all your URLs and make sure they're correct before you do it, and then try it again. But that is basically how you set up the AOP system with GLC v3. Now, before I go, there's a lot more to the patching system than meets the eye. Like, for example, you can use a custom patch design. So you can basically create an image that is the size of the launcher and display that, the patcher, and display that in the patching system in the background. There's loads of other options that you can play about with as well and tweak with regards to the patching system. You know, if you've got a developer edition of GLC v3, then you're in for a right treat, because there are so many things that you can do with the developer edition. So, for example, do you remember when we put the where's the data folder? Do you remember when we put the patch configuration file inside the data folder here? Well, with the developer version, you can actually host this file on your server, and then you just simply send a command line in here. So wherever you trigger the updater, you can send a command line here that simply says download the patch configuration file from this URL. So that means you can update the configuration file on your server at any time, and it'll instantly reflect across all your launchers and patching systems. There's a whole host of other things you can do. If you have something in mind and you think, I want it to work this way, will it work this way, have a look over the documentation system. If you're still unsure after you check that, then just pop a question in Discord, or do a search in the Discord server and see if somebody's already asked it and there's an answer to it. And if there isn't, then just pop the question in, and one of our support staff or maybe one of our other users will get back to you and tell you whether that's possible or not. But again, this video tutorial series is just concentrated purely on setting up the basic patch system. There's so many other things you can do. You can use the registry, you can use multiple servers with the developer edition. You can there's honestly, just check out the documentation. There's so many, you know, you can go from a basic patch system to a professional patch system. It has a lot of professional features in there if you're using the developer edition of GLC v3. But that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the patch system covered in Game Launcher Creator v3. I hope these videos have been useful for you. And again, you know, I can't stress it enough. Check out the documentation system over at byteboxmedia.support website, and search through the Discord, see if anyone's got any answers to any questions that you may have there. And if not, just post up in the Discord, it's absolutely fine, or you can drop us an email and we'll help you out there where we can as well. But have fun with Game Launcher Creator, have fun with your patching system. You can literally have it up and running. I mean, these videos altogether have probably accumulated to 30 minutes. We've managed to cover and build an entire patching system in less than 30 minutes. So yeah, just have fun, and don't stress. When things get a little bit too blurry, don't stress about it. You've got the support here, you've got the documentation, you've got these videos, and you've got the support staff online to help out where possible. But again, triple check all your URLs, and just make sure that your patch salt matches up with what's on your patch salt in the server as well. But yeah, have fun with GLC, and I'll probably see you in some extended videos that I'm probably going to do on this, just to show you some tricks that you can do with the developer edition.